Thomas disagrees. Says Giannis would, quote, dog you every single time you stepped on the court. Giannis going around all them. He dunking on him. He's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. You can talk all that stuff because you don't play no more. I love a war of the words, guys, between 80s and 90s NBA players. So the question here is Giannis still being disrespected? And I got to say, Rick, you touched on it earlier. The international players, I know they won MVPs the last couple of years with Jokic and Giannis, but they still are being disrespected. And it's crazy because, like, Charles Oakley was one of my favorite players in the 90s. I was born in New York. I love those Knicks teams. The first game I ever went to was Knicks-Lakers. Started to fall in love with both teams. And I like Charles Oakley's enforcer mentality. I think he led the league in, like, flagrant fouls, ejections, technicals, whatever, all that stuff. But for Charles Oakley to come out and say this nonsense that Giannis would have been a bench player. I mean, Rick, I'm sorry, but the reality is Charles Oakley wouldn't even be in the NBA today if he came out of college and tried to make the league. Like, it's so weird, the hagiography we have of 80s and 90s players. Like, they were the greatest players ever. They never missed shots. Charles Oakley was the greatest power forward in the league. Power forward doesn't even exist anymore. Giannis would absolutely have wrecked 80s and 90s NBA. Just the same way Steph Curry would have utterly dominated 80s, 90s NBA. I know it was a more physical league, but guys, guess what? The athletes now are bigger, faster, and stronger. And it's weird, Greg. We don't do this in the NFL. I don't hear anybody saying, man, you remember those guys in the 80s and the 90s? They would dominate the NFL today. True. Like, we don't say that in football. We don't say in Major League Baseball, man, those pitchers in the 80s, they really brought it. I don't think anybody could get a hit off that. We just don't do that. So why do we insist on it in the NBA? And my take here, Rick, is that a lot of the media grew up on the 80s NBA and they love it. 80s and 90s was the jam. I loved it too, but I'm also a realist. And guys, I'm sorry. That was an expansion era of basketball when you had 6 expansion teams in a 7-year period, which happened to coincide with Jordan dominating the league, Magic and Bird leaving the league. It was just a poorer brand of basketball. When you bring in the international players, Rick, I saw a note that there was 109 players on rosters to start this season who were international. There was maybe a dozen back in the 80s and 90s. We're playing a global game of basketball, and I'm sorry, guys. The game of basketball today is far better, far more talented and loaded than it was in the 80s and 90s, and this is true in baseball, and Greg, you know this is true in football. And Rick, I just don't understand the disrespect from these old heads in the 80s and 90s bashing today's players. It's getting old. It's Barkley, it's Oakley, and it's really getting tired.
J-Mac, you just dug so many rabbit holes that I refuse to go down. I won't do it. So I'm not going to go there. I'm going to address the question at hand. And I will say this. Look, I loved what Charles Oakley was as an enforcer, and he's a character, and he's been a character since he retired. For a guy who couldn't jump over a phone book, he had a very distinguished career and made his presence felt in more ways than one. But if I'm ever going to have somebody who is going to vouch for my toughness and ability and do it against Charles Oakley, I could not find anybody better than Isaiah Lord Thomas III. One of the original bad boys with the Pistons, a 2-time champion, a guy who scored 25 points on a badly sprained ankle in Game 6 of the NBA Finals. A guy from the west side of Chicago. Like, I appreciate that Isaiah came out and said what he said about Giannis. And I've been perplexed by this myself, because it's not just Charles Oakley. It's current stars in the league have not been willing, and a number of former players who are now TV analysts who are not giving Giannis the respect he deserves. I was one of those when he won his two MVPs. I wasn't a guy who voted for him first on my ballot either of those years. I thought he was more statistical than he was champion. I needed to see it in the postseason. I needed him to be that go-to guy. I was assured by a number of people I know who have coached him and played with him, he's going to get there. He has that grit. And while I had my doubts, he has demonstrated that. He demonstrated that last year. A guy who comes off of a sprained knee against the Atlanta Hawks and is back, a week later, and then leads the Bucks to a championship and does so playing 5 and getting 50 points in one of the games. Like, what else does Giannis have to do to prove that he's not just some foreign player, he's not just some long, agile athlete? He's got a complete package. And he's not just a great player, he is a great leader for the Milwaukee Bucks. So I don't, Charles Oakley has a book out, seems to be getting into it with everybody. One thing to do it with Knicks owner Jim Dolan. It's another to disrespect a guy like Giannis, who is all about the right things, a defending champion, and continues to develop his game. Giannis would destroy Charles Oakley. So if Charles Oakley thinks that Giannis Antetokounmpo would be a bench player, Charles Oakley would not, whatever that league is where Giannis would be a bench player, Charles Oakley would not be capable of playing in that league.
Yeah, for me, I kind of side with both of these guys for a couple of reasons. Number one, I do feel like it was disrespectful to Giannis. So let me answer the question there. But what Charles Oakley is alluding to is not the progression of the Giannis Antetokounmpo that we see now. He's talking about the younger Giannis saying that, oh, we would force him to shoot jump shots. Well, he can shoot jump shots now. I don't know if Charles Oakley has really paid attention, but this was the ultimate disrespect from Charles Oakley's comments, in my perspective, is his inability to acknowledge the growth of Giannis and what he's become as a basketball player. Like, he started out very raw. And every single year that we have watched this kid play, he has become a better version of a basketball player. He has answered the call. When we talk about Ben Simmons, when we talk about players that can improve here, and can they get this jump shot, and can they extend this, and can they start to dribble and handle the ball and play? Giannis has done it all. Inside out, he's worked on his game both offensively and defensively. So when I hear people talk about Giannis, it is out of sheer disrespect because of his ability to not really be that likable, lovable, outgoing side with every superstar. He hasn't done those things. Excuse me. He's been one to kind of go against the grain, not say, I want to team up with this player. He's been noted. He has said it himself. That's not me. I want to do it this way. I want to do it my way. And today's guys in this league don't do that. They run and they pair. They partner. They draw up this relationship and they try to win a championship that way. Giannis fits everything about old school basketball and new school better than almost any player outside of LeBron James because of his build and because of his mentality. And when you have the mentality that Giannis has, you can play in any era because you will make yourself a better version depending on where you're playing and how you're asked to play that game. Giannis has proved that more than anybody that we've seen in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
That's a good point, Greg, about not teaming up. I personally think teaming up is cool and smart, but I would agree with your point. My other issue is these guys from the 80s and 90s want to protect their era because, guys, I don't know if you look closely, but I believe Larry Bird had 3 MVPs. I also think Magic Johnson had 3 MVPs. Well, if Giannis has 2 already, and he's maybe going to win one this year, he's not even 30 years old. We're potentially looking at now Giannis having, 4 MVPs? Can he win 5? I don't know. And then all of a sudden we start forgetting, you got to push Magic and Bird down the totem pole a little bit. And all of a sudden, Charles Barkley's not a top 25 player all time. And these guys are really protecting their era. And how do you do that? Well, you bash Steph Curry and the jump shooting Warriors, which is what Barkley's done like a clown for about 5 years now. And he looks ever more stupid with every passing jumper that Curry splashes. And these guys, all they want to do is bash the NBA today. Like, hello, teaming up is smart. Hey, why should I be forced? Like Zion Williamson is playing in New Orleans. Well, he's not playing. He's sitting on the bench injured. And it's like, why should I play here? I don't want to be here. I don't like this front office. Just because they drafted me, I've got to be here forever. Like maybe the 80s and 90s players weren't smart. And they say, I want to play wherever I want to play. And, like, I want to team up with guys that I like. Like, I have no problem with that. And all this bashing of Giannis for not doing that, I think, like Greg said, he should be, get accolades for actually sticking around in Minnesota. Milwaukee. Although they did add Drew Holiday, who was a pretty nice player, right, Rick?
Yes, look, there's when we can start to compare eras, that's where the arguments get frayed, because the truth of the matter is the guys in the 80s and the 90s played a certain